This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set. During the age of social distancing, we're recording remotely and releasing episodes almost every day.
What is the view? Does it belong to you? Do you see the same blue as I think I do?
Today's guest is Andy Stack, a multi-instrumentalist and singer who's one half of the duo Wye Oak and who also releases solo material as Joyero. Andy spoke to me from his home in North Carolina.
I keep myself close to you. You say that was not what.
Hello.
Andy, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing? I'm good. Everything's good and normal. Is everything good and normal for you?
Things are as good as they can be. I'm feeling pretty grateful. But
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I think it feels like there's a psychic weight that I'm carrying around, as are most people that I've talked to.
Yeah, for sure.
What have you been up to today?
Today, I ate some oatmeal. I eat oatmeal every morning for the last year and a half probably, and I've
Oh, you dropped out for a second there.
point. I was saying I've gotten really good at making oatmeal.
Is there a ritual to it?
I have I just have a recipe that seems to be the key. It involves coconut milk and raisins and apple slices and a dollop of peanut butter. It's a pretty stellar way to start the day. So that's my general morning thing that I do. And I just moved into a house that I bought literally right at the cusp, at the precipice of this moment when everything started to get bad.
Man, if you would have just waited a few months, maybe you could have gotten a better bargain.
Maybe, I don't know. I think if I think about it really hard, then I can kind of end up convincing myself either way on it.
Right.
At times I freak out that I really fucked up. And at times, I do think that if I hadn't done it, then I just wouldn't have done it at all, because I would be in this position where I was renting and living in this group house that I had lived in for a couple of years. And I would have probably said oh, thank God I didn't buy a house. But honestly, the last month and a half of my life, I got off of tour with Wye Oak. We were doing a tour, and then I got home and pretty much immediately jumped into this house, and I've been working 50 or 60 hours a week on this house, this real kind of fixer-upper house since then. And it's been the place that I go to every day, rather than, being, staying at home. And it's a place that I can go to and be alone and not be irresponsible, but still feel productive, which I guess I could be doing that in a musical sense. But
well, I don't know, because fixing a house engages a different part of your mind. And from what I've heard, speaking to lots of artists during this time, it seems like it's hard for folks to be creative right now. in that way. So maybe it's kind of the perfect activity during this time.
Yeah. I mean, I know that a lot of people are having trouble. I also know some people who are being really prolific, and I'm not quite sure which one I am. I think I'm about to find out, because I'm kind of coming to the end of this house project and settled in and finally in a position where I can like really focus in on some projects that need my attention and focus on being creative in that other way again. But I'm certainly, it's like you said, I'm certainly carrying this like existential weight that, I don't know if it's good for me in terms of getting into a creative space. But boy, having like actual physical projects, like physical labor to do, and to see the slow progress of a house coming together over time has been like, honestly, the most amazing, like therapeutic activity I could possibly have wished for during this time.
And you're in North Carolina these days, right?
Yeah.
I think when we first met over email, you were living in Texas, right?
I guess. I don't know. I feel like that was a couple of years ago. I remember meeting you in, was it Milwaukee? You were there for a wedding or something?
That's when we met in person, but you had gotten in touch via email years before that.
Maybe so. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I moved to North Carolina like 2.5 years ago. And it was after a pretty long string of living in Marfa, Texas. It felt like far, far out in West Texas, in this little art town there. And I moved here. There were all kinds of like life shake-up things happening, and it was like a get out of Dodge situation in a sense. And there were a number of places I considered moving, like moving back to Baltimore, which is where I grew up and where my family is, and moving to LA. You live in LA, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe moving to LA, or maybe Portland. Like I had lived in Portland for a little bit, but Jen, who
Jen
I play in
Wassner.
Wye Oak with.
Yeah.
Jen Wassner, yeah. She is here, and she's been here for like, 6 years or something like that. And it was right at the beginning of a cycle, and I knew she was here, and I knew it was going to make logistic sense for us to be in the same place. And I also just knew a lot of people and had a lot of really good friends and solid community, both like musical and otherwise, here in the Triangle. And I knew there were some great musicians here, but I don't think I even really fully like took it in before I spent some time here and started to explore like what a thriving and supportive musical climate it is here. Which I guess because like didn't you grow up with like basically half the population of Durham?
I wouldn't say that, but I've befriended lots of those people throughout my life, and some of my closest friends.
Well, it's a lot of Wisconsin people, right?
Yes.
And that's where you came up?
Yes.
Yeah, like old bandmates of yours.
That's right.
And I
my
mean,
best friend lives there, who was in the
BJ?
first band I toured with. BJ's an ex-bandmate of mine. Nathan Lilly is, and I became best friends in high school.
Nathan's your best friend?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I didn't know Nathan was, yeah. I mean, I should have.
I mean, I don't want to quantify things by saying best, but he's one of my best friends.
If you guys don't have like friendship bracelets, then it doesn't count.
Just put it this way, we're super tight.
Okay.
How come you don't sound like you're from Baltimore, Andy? Did you used to sound like you were from Baltimore?
I don't think so. I think I had way too like suburban an upbringing to really get that. But I will say that my dad really slips into that. You know, goes over there and does what he's doing over there. Like he doesn't usually have that, but like if he has a couple drinks or if he's really tired or like weirdly if he's like talking about his like childhood or his family, like it comes out. It's in there. That it is a freakish accent for sure.
Gina Schock from the Go-Go's was on this show years ago, and she's got a straight-up Baltimore accent, and I love it.
Yeah. From the Go-Go's, really?
Yeah. She told me this story about how she had a few $100 and some Coke and got in her car, drove to LA, and became a star. I always find it interesting when people come on the show and tell me about successfully executing a plan. Are you that kind of a person?
Yeah, that's not really what the music industry is known for.
Well, I think some people that are very successful are the type of people that very consciously can lay out a plan and execute on it. And then half of the people are just really good at following their instincts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you fall on one side of that?
Is there a neither category? also, I would appreciate an alternative.
Yeah. So, how would you characterize your approach to having a career in music?
Well, the thing about a career in music is that it's not really linear. For anyone. I mean, I guess maybe there are people like, I don't know, like Keith Richards or something where there's like a very simple sort of like, description or like linear equation there. But like, I feel like most sort of mortal musicians have the situation where every, couple of years, which actually I guess is a pretty good way to quantify it because, you get to the end of a cycle basically. Like if you're releasing music and you're touring and you're doing the grind that is sort of at least up until this point where everything's off the table. If you're doing that grind and doing what you're expected to do, then you get to the end of this cycle and you're filled with just like the most intense emptiness and terror, and you have to reevaluate what the next step is. And everyone comes in these like depression waves, goes through them many, many times in the course of trying to figure out what their career is. So yeah, there's certainly times where I feel like I am in control. There's times when I feel like I have a vision, and then there's times where, I mean, like, full disclosure, it's like right now I've been talking to people recently of being like, am I even a musician? Like, does this even count anymore? Like what? And I think, a lot of people, probably dentists are even having that same like questioning right now because nobody really knows what's viable and how long this is going to go.
Well, that raises the question of whether constantly engaging in the business of music is what makes you a musician, or if it's something that you just inherently are.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a personal question, and I think it probably has roots in like how you were socialized as a child or something. Like, were you like breastfed or like nurtured enough as a child to feel secure, or are you constantly? Yeah, there's definitely like attachment theory to that question.
I think also in a capitalist world, we associate, being a real musician with making a living playing music. And I don't know that that's necessarily an accurate way of looking at things, or a productive way of looking at things. Yeah,
I mean, it's one way, but yeah, like you said, it's the like economic system that we find ourselves in, but it doesn't measure like satisfaction or quality, certainly. But you know, I feel like I've had it both ways, and I had some like at the very beginning of when I was doing music with Jen, when we were making Wye Oak records, we got signed on to Merge Records like on our first record within months of making it, and without any fucking clue what we were doing or how things, you know, quote unquote, worked in the music industry. And I think there was this sense like, oh yeah, we are in control of this, we know what we're doing. And then like there's an education in it. You know, the more you do it, the more you realize that it's not simple, and there's no I don't want to say there's no hope, but it is a really strange business to be in, and ultimately you end up having to sort of find different angles in, which it seems like you've done, like the film work and commercial work and like that. I do a lot of that too, and that is, in a way, I find that to be so much more fulfilling and calming, and I don't know, somehow like in my logical brain, it feels like legitimate in a way that it's hard to make being in a band feel. Do you ever feel that way? Or do you ever feel like you're just...
it's an easier thing to explain to the uninitiated, and it's simpler because I'm getting paid to do something. But I feel like scoring a film is kind of like being an architect, wherein there's an artful aspect to it, but in the end, I'm working at the behest of somebody else, and whatever I make has to fit onto a particular plot of land, or in film, you know, into a scene, and it has to service the needs of the people that are going to live inside of that structure, or in film, you know, the character's emotional needs and the emotional needs of the script. So I'm tailoring something to order, and I'm removing myself as the arbiter of whether it's good or not. You know, in the end, it has to serve the film or the show. And so
I think that's the key to me, that what you just brought up is the key to me, is that you can remove ego from it.
Right. It's more about the craft. There is an art aspect to it, and I think, you know, for a long time I denied that part of myself, but as I've been doing it for longer and longer, I've almost been scoring for 20 years now, I'm realizing that, you know, the most successful projects that I've worked on and the most enjoyable projects are ones where I can bring something that I feel uniquely qualified to bring to the table. Rather than just doing whatever, you know, recognizing that there is, you know, within that architecture metaphor, I mean, there's still room to do something distinctive, like a distinctive architect would, you know, do something that's recognizable and still services the film.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
But
nobody would ever look at architecture. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's an easier thing to explain to other people. Like if I was in a cab and someone asked me what I did and I said, I'm an artist, you know, that opens up a weird can of worms. Yeah. If I said, I'm an architect, and they said, oh, really? Have you designed anything that I might know? And then I mentioned a few buildings that are, you know, well known, then it makes you feel more legit. But you're not. I mean, you're not. It's not like any less legitimate to express yourself through writing songs for a band or for an album. I mean, like I just made my first album as a as the sole songwriter and not in a band context, and as the vocalist, and that's what I am most excited about now.
Oh yeah, no, I get that. I actually want to hear about that. I know that you're supposed to be interviewing me, but before I even ask you that, I'm curious how this this sort of like tightrope walk, this balance between the art and the business, and the satisfaction of the art within the structure of this, like film scoring or this more business oriented construct. Like, do you deal with that in LA more so than you think you would elsewhere? Like, how does that play out for you there?
Well, I started my composing career in Milwaukee, where I grew up, and at the time that I started, there was a filmmaker there who had some, international notoriety. He had done a film that won Sundance a few years earlier. It was actually a team of filmmakers, and I was friends with them, and just kind of started winging it. They asked me and another friend to write music for a film, and we just kind of like figured it out as we went along. But here in LA, you were asking if it's more kind of business oriented. I wouldn't say that.
I would think that it's like inverted from the way that you would expect it to be.
What do you mean?
Like in the sense of being people are more. There's more of an idea of success with within film scoring than it would be within songwriting.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there certainly is, like, if you look at the numbers, there's more money being generated by Netflix than by, record labels these days. It's something that they've figured out how to monetize in a way that record labels kind of missed the boat on. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the thing that I really like about LA is you can come here, and some would say that it's delusional, but people can, obviously people come here to try to, do something in the creative arts. And coming from the Midwest, it always felt kind of hoity-toity. Like I felt like I had to curb my ambitions in that regard. And that there was only so far I could go. And even though, I think it was really hard to do something here, and even though lots of people crash and burn, there are more opportunities here. Yeah, I gather that especially from the realm of like film scoring. People just always say like, yeah, you have to be in LA or you have to be in New York or you have to be able to like be in the room with people. I mean, what I've found is I've been able to locate a community of people probably not dissimilar to the community that you're a part of in North Carolina. And I can say that because I know lots of the folks that you hang out with there. Yeah, it's all personal on some level. Yeah, it is. And those are the most fruitful creative relationships. And then as a byproduct, they're good for business. Once I stopped focusing on trying to, like meet with all the studios and all of that kind of thing, like things started to fall into place. Yeah. I'm talking too much. I want to hear. I've got so many questions for you. Well, I want to hear about. We should talk about your experience putting a record out as a songwriter, because I just did the same thing last year, and
I bet that we had some similar experiences from that in terms of like the joys and the terrors of sort of stepping out as the front person.
Well, tell me about your experience doing it. What was the impetus to make that record?
For me, it was a sort of a set of songs that all belong together, and came out of a particular sort of period in my life, and it was sort of a difficult, painful, challenging time in my life, and it was enough to drag my voice out of me, because I think I had written songs. I had been more of a lyricist, more of a singer, and more out front when I was younger. And I really got away from that for like the better part of probably 10 years. And it was a time where I was making a lot of records with Wye Oak, with Jen, and Jen is such an effortless singer and charismatic front person. And I was happy in that time, I think, to just lay back a little bit and focus on what I felt were my strengths. And at a certain point, a few years ago, I think I started to feel like I had more to say. And I had this really powerful and sort of healing experience of like rediscovering my voice and singing again. And, I've always been like a multi-instrumentalist. I don't know if this is even a drum podcast anymore. I don't it doesn't seem like it is, but
it never was a drum podcast. It was a podcast about people that happened to play drums for the first 200 episodes.
Okay, cool.
And now it's just a podcast about people that happen to play music. But we never really talk about the mechanics of music.
Of drumming? Yeah, good. Yeah, because I never no. I'm not very good at that, and I in fact I don't really. I mean, I was just talking about how I'm not even sure I'm a musician anymore. So we should just talk about like construction and making oatmeal, and then I'll be good.
But do you really make oatmeal anymore?
I think it's the only thing I do these days. But yeah, I've been like a multi-instrumentalist for a long time and played all this stuff, but I haven't really thought of myself as a singer. And I think this was a way that I got back to it. And I had sung before, but honestly, I don't feel like I really knew what I was doing or knew how to work with my voice. Not that I exactly do now, but it feels very different to me now. And, that's just the one side of it, of like writing and, recording. And then there's a whole other crazy side of it, which is like getting out in front of people and singing, which is just so different than being a sideman or being a collaborator. Because when I tour, mostly when I tour and play songs as Joyero, I'm solo, and that's just like, that's a trip. That's a whole other trip. And so discovering that and getting more comfortable doing that has been really gratifying, because I did a lot of touring last year on that.
So did writing that album coincide with your get out of Dodge situation, leaving Texas?
Yeah, more or less.
What was going on in your life that kind of pushed you into finding your voice?
I went through a divorce a couple of years ago, and I guess about 3 years ago now. And I mean, I can't really say that like my record or the songs directly coincide with that or directly come from that. And everything is abstract and in the way that it always is, but
Right, but
it
sometimes
definitely.
experiencing a tragedy can kind of shake you loose or shake that voice
Oh,
loose.
totally. It kicks the crap out of you, and then you can use the songs as a way to kind of figure it out, which it largely is what it was for me, where I really was often not clear what message I was even sending or what I was trying to say, and the songs were able to kind of reveal their meaning to me after the fact, um, which I found very therapeutic. So
So how
yeah,
does it feel when you go out in front of people and sing?
I have a pretty good experience with it at this point. I got through the sort of shaky voice terror moments, which you definitely have to power through that. But I really enjoy. I probably played about 60 shows or something like that of that material last year, and it's become a very affirming, positive experience. And I've played. Oh well, I actually. Jen and I just did this Wye Oak tour where we were also doing Joyero songs and Flock of Dimes songs, which is her solo project, and we had this like larger expanded band, so we were able to play these solo songs in this like fully fleshed out version in a way that we hadn't been able to do before, which was really amazing. And then literally just today we canceled the rest of those dates.
When were they scheduled
Because
for?
they were supposed to have already happened in March, I guess, and then this stuff came out, and we were so excited because when the COVID stuff came, we were able to push them into the end of July, and somehow we were able to secure all the same venues. We were going to do in LA. We were going to do 2 shows at the Hollywood Forever in the inside there,
Mm-hmm. The Masonic.
and yeah, the Masonic Lodge, exactly, and. But we were able to get all the same venues and all the same routing for late July, and then obviously that's not happening. So we just we rescheduled once, and then at this point, we're just gonna call it off, and we're really hopeful that we can do it again sometime soon, because it's this this version. Wye Oak has probably played like 1,000 shows over 12 or 13 years. And yet, like, it's always just been us, or it's been like when you saw us, it was like us and Will, one other person was playing bass. But this was a chance to get like a really full version of it. And I got out from behind the kit, and I was playing like guitar and saxophone, and able to play all these other parts that I did on the record that I never got to play before. So it's very bittersweet, because we played like 10 shows or something like that on the East Coast, and it was so fun and such a good band. But who knows when we're going to be able to do it again.
How does getting out and singing and being the sole focus compare to playing drums for you? I love watching drummers who can really be present and be like connected in the room. And I I don't know if I'm one of those drummers. I think I get kind of insular, and especially in some other groups, it's not so much. But with Wye Oak, it's like I've got a lot of like tasks that I'm doing, and I'm really kind of locked in. When it's been a duo setup, I'm really locked in and playing a lot of bass lines or playing other parts on keys while I'm drumming, and I'm really locked into Jen. But it's like this tightrope walk that I'm doing, and definitely the solo act has been a way to actually just
fucking loosen up. Like, I feel like I loosened up so much after, after that initial, terror of the first few shows. It just was like, I felt like I was communing with people. I was like in the space and making music in a more organic way, which that's just kind of what I want to do now. That's just, and that's what this last Wye Oak tour was. And it's a lot of the music I'm listening to, and a lot of like the people in North Carolina. I don't know if it's as a result of like the sort of like folk or old time community here, but there's so many great musicians who are just in time and space with each other. And in fact, it's like even people who are doing like weird experimental stuff, like the Sylvanesso folks are a great example of that. Like watching Nick play a modular setup is like as organic as it could possibly be if he was playing, a piano or a violin or something. It's just, it's a reminder that they're all just tools, and that there are all these different ways in. So I don't know if it was the singing part. I mean, definitely there's like a physicality to that that's way different. But I did find when I started coming out from behind the drums, like I got a very different experience.
You can twist me in the wind, don't tell me where you've been. You can make me ghost again. And you watch my head spin, make me sit for my dinner. You can make me ghost again. Make me a ghost again. Why away? I wait outside the house, lifting ear to every sound. I sleep all day, like a dog whose master's out. I don't know up from down.
Did you play shows, or was this more of like a recording project?
We played a proof of concept show at the end of last year at the
Proof
Hollywood
of
Fair.
concept show. Excellent.
Well, because on the record I played lots of the instruments, and then we and it was produced by Mary Timoney, who played most of the guitar on the record as well. And I wanted to tour, but I wanted to kind of figure it out first before I just went on tour. So I got a band together, and we played one show to kind of, so that I could kind of work it out and learn from the experience, and as far as like however it might inform the touring configuration. But it went great. It felt amazing. It was really, really scary at the time.
Yeah. Did you did you have the terrors of singing, or was it just the standard like first show with a band kind of situation?
As a drummer, I don't think I feel terror anymore. Maybe because I've been doing it for so long and I have a certain level of competence and confidence. But I think it was so healthy for me to do something, to try something new. And I surrounded myself with incredible musicians. There were 20 people.
I remember
on stage.
that. I remember seeing the list of people you were playing with and being like, cool, you called in all the favors.
Well, yeah, I mean, so after I feel like I had a lot of work to do kind of as the band leader and leading rehearsals and just getting the logistics set up. And I, didn't have, a stage manager or anything like that, but it was relatively involved because, as I said, there was 20 people on stage, and there's a chamber orchestra. All the parts need to be in place. I wanted to make sure everybody got food, so I was like arranging for catering and things like that. And then once none of that stuff needed to be happening anymore, like once all of the logistical stuff that had been like distracting me from the terror was taken care of, then I got really scared. Like I would say after sound check, I had this inclination to want to go back and like it felt like the most natural thing in the world to want to go sit behind the drums,
Yeah.
But Matt Cameron was playing drums.
Yeah.
And I was
not really
just like,
let me show you how it's done situation.
Well, no, it wasn't even like that. It just feels like that's where my home is, behind the drums, right? Because I'm so used to it. But then I was like, wait a second, why are all these people playing with me? Like it was almost like then it felt incumbent on me to really step up. But I'm really happy with how it went.
Yeah, you got to put yourself off balance like that. In life,
it was.
Did
everything
you find
in my
that
body was telling me it was the right thing to do. It was also really scary, but for me, I had already kind of built a career as a composer, and I love composing, but I think I was neglecting my own creative voice for a long time, and I was, through a series of events, I was able to finally, let it out, kind of like what you were saying.
Yeah. I guess that's just it. Is like we were just talking about it earlier on. Is like you have to be constantly reassessing. And the idea that your career or your style or your skill set is some sort of fixed thing that you figure out, like a dentist or something, and then you just do it until you don't do it anymore. It's not like that at all. And
this is your second dentist illusion in this conversation. Here's the thing: is I think you can approach anything with either attitude, right? I mean, if you are a concert musician and you just want to play classical literature, and you get to a level of virtuosity that is adequate for that, you can kind of approach it. You don't have to think about your creative voice as much. I mean, you can, but you can approach it as a craft. And similarly, if you're a dentist and you really love dentistry and you want to push the practice into something new, you can do that too. It's all about how you want to live.
Yeah. I have a great dentist. I don't mean to slag on my dentist. She's very creative.
I know. I noticed you have quite the grill. You and Jen met in Baltimore in high school, right?
Well, yes. We were introduced at around 15 or 16 years old.
Did you go to the same school?
We didn't. She went somewhere else, but we had a mutual friend who we played in a band with. And like when we first met, right at the very first day we ever met, she came to this band practice of this like kind of grunge. I don't even know what it was. I know she always says I was wearing a Weezer shirt that day, so if that's any description of the kind of music we were making.
So when did you graduate high school?
2002.
Okay, so you started in around 98, graduated in 2002.
Yeah. Yeah,
and did you form?
I
You didn't
started
form the
oh,
band
good.
while you were in high school. You were just friends, and then later
The band Wye Oak. We played in several different bands in high school and college, and then sort of some other bands that were sort of like parallel while Wye Oak was getting started, and
you cut
okay.
out right when you were
I just
talking.
made a really, really dumb pun.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's probably good that the recording cut
Okay.
out. I was saying we were probably about 20 when we started making the songs that ended up being the first Wye Oak record. And then yeah, on from there. And we were in Baltimore together at the beginning of that, and early on when we were making records, it was like, I don't know if everybody feels this way, but I really feel like I lived in this like golden era of music growing up, and being in Baltimore at that time, because there was just like so much awesome stuff developing, and it was like kind of the aftermath of like some of the I think Baltimore had kind of taken up the mantle from like the DC hardcore and post-hardcore scene, and Baltimore had like Dan Deacon and
Right.
Beach House and Future Islands and Lower Dens and all these great like Matmos was there, and they have influenced me a lot.
Double Dagger.
Yeah, Double Dagger was like it was just a really cool scene going on there at that time.
Yeah, it was kind of a freaky scene. I somehow we ended up being a part of it, but we were like definitely the square kids, because it was a lot of like art school kids. Right.
Dustin Wong. Do you know Dustin Wong?
Yes, he lives here now.
Alabama.
I ran into him a couple times.
Yeah. I haven't seen him in many years. He was in Tokyo for a long time, but yeah, like the ponytail and then Dustin doing his solo stuff, like just amazing art rock, like weird spazzy stuff going on at that time.
Yeah, Baltimore reminds me a lot of Milwaukee, where I grew up, in the sense that it has this kind of, it has a strong working class and the attitude that you might associate with that. But then there's this freaky underbelly that seems to have been part of Baltimore for a long time, whether it's,
oh yeah,
you mentioned DC, but if we go back a generation before the bands you were talking about, there were great bands in Baltimore like Lungfish, and then obviously all that great John Waters stuff before that. I mean, it seems like it's because of its proximity to certain other cities and because of its unique identity as a city unto itself, and the fact that it's relatively affordable to live there means that people can get really freaky.
Does Milwaukee have the sort of like scrappy little brother like ethos? Like that's kind of the ball. There's a lot of people who
right. Well, Milwaukee's
commute to DC, but yeah, like you said, it's the cheaper place to live, and like there's a lot of rough around the edges quality in Baltimore.
I'd say that exists in Milwaukee. But anyway, so you met in high school, and after high school, you went to music school for a while, right?
I did. I studied bass and jazz composition at Berkeley College.
Why did you laugh when you said I did?
It's just the same laugh that every Berkeley student laughs, because most of them drop out, or most of them like try to hide their identities from admitting that they've been there.
I went there for a couple of years.
Oh, did you? I didn't remember that.
But I understand why you're saying that. So let's drill into that. Why would you want to hide your identity? as a Berklee alumnus?
There's a bit of a cheeseball factor for sure with that school. I think that there's a very, I guess the reputation is like that it's a very non-artistic music school. Would you agree with that at least in terms of reputation?
I feel like it depends on who you're asking. If you're talking to somebody if you're talking to somebody in the general public, they think of it as a highly regarded, bastion of music. If you talk to people in certain strains of music, they might agree with you. They might agree with that. But if you talk to people that are, particularly in like independent music or weirder music, then they would probably say that it's a corny place, or as you said, a non-artistic music school.
Yeah, I think you're unsurprisingly presenting a much more eloquent and nuanced description. But I think, honestly, I got a lot of positive, schooling there. There was definitely a lot that I left with that I was able to sort of like continue to use for years. I don't know if I was not a great musician while I was there, but I was, I at least learned a lot that I sort of sifted through and then was able to integrate as I came into contact with great musicians at a later time.
I had a strange experience there because I had already started touring and making recordings before I went. I kind of got started early. Labor? No, before actually it was the band that I had with Nathan in high school.
Oh, okay.
And I had we kind of modeled ourselves after, DC bands in the sense that we were, or a number of kind of post-punk kind of scenes where we were embracing DIY and booking our own tours and making records, and it felt like we were really kind of taking charge of our trajectory. And then when I went to music school, I was hoping that I would meet other like-minded people that I could play music with, or kind of find a community. And I really didn't meet anybody there that I'm still friends with. I mean, there's a couple people that I was friends with before I went and I am still friends with. And interestingly, both of them graduated and neither of them work in music. Like one went on to medical school and one is a computer programmer now.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting. I had a sort of similar experience there, which was thinking it was going to be one thing, thinking that I was going to be one thing, that I was going to, I was studying jazz composition, like capital J. And I really thought that was my direction, but through the couple years that I spent there, it helped me to realize like what I actually wanted to be doing and who my people actually were. And that was right when Jen and I were making the first record, and we were starting to play a lot of shows in Baltimore, and I was like doing this mad dash commute back to Baltimore like every other weekend for a while, and it helped me kind of cut through my own clouded personal expectations for my future.
One of the things that I realized when I was at music school is the way in which it was being presented was counter to the original spirit of the music.
and for me, the decision was much less philosophical than that. It was more just like, oh, I want to make like noisy rock music. I'm like studying, these like Chick Corea scores, but like I'm listening to Sonic Youth, and so like, what am I doing? There was a disconnect.
Yeah, for me, I had already seen Sonic Youth a bunch of times. I'd already kind of lived in that world, and I wanted to see what else was out there and see what else I could do and be a part of. And that said, the school wasn't the best vehicle into that world. I mean, if I had to do it all over again, I would have just moved to New York, gotten a piano teacher that I could have one-on-one lessons with once a week, a drum teacher I could have one-on-one lessons with once a week, gone to lots of shows and worked at a recording studio for free and still spent less money than going to music school,
Yeah.
I've been like been around stuff that was actually happening. Yeah, but it was weird. Can we
do that now? Is that something I can still do now?
Of course you can. Like, now's a great time to do it.
Yeah.
You could do Skype lessons with people, and you have a recording studio and you can work there.
That's true. Very good point. My girlfriend's been taking Skype fiddle lessons with our friend Joseph, who's a really awesome old-time fiddle player, like a scholar of old-time music, and it's cool. I think it works pretty well. The Skype music lesson thing. So I'm curious I don't know how many interviews you've been doing during this pandemic.
During the pandemic, I've probably already done something like 40.
Okay, awesome. Well, you're very industrious, far more than me.
I wouldn't chalk it up to industriousness as much as the desire to foster a sense of community during this time.
Yeah, that's all we got. Well, I'm curious then, since you're an expert, or at least you're highly informed from all these interviews, what you think is going to happen. I feel like this situation, like what's going to happen in the music business, because I feel like this whole thing is basically going to drive like everyone I know out of the music business. And there's so many people who are just like on the fringes already. And this is the thing that's just going to be like, cool, gotta like, I don't know, stop writing songs, get a job. I don't know what it is, but I mean, these are the things I'm wrestling with. And I'm curious if you feel that, or if it's just that everything is totally fucked, and that even if you wanted to go and get a different job, that there's nowhere to go right now. But do you feel people generally being hopeful about it, or are people considering their exit strategies?
I think for most people, it's an opportunity to reassess the way in which they want to do business, like whether or not the album cycle is the optimal model, whether or not doing one night stands is the optimal model. And I think the music business has existed in lots of different ways over the years, and obviously recorded music has only been, widespread for about 100 years. So it's interesting, that there was a recorded music business, and it, in the early years, obviously the musicians got screwed. There was a brief window, during which time some baby boomers made a lot of money as artists, and that extended to Generation X. And then, by the time the early 2000s or by the time the early 2000s came along and file sharing became prevalent, that business kind of became less valuable. So that whole life cycle happened so quickly. And there was a music business before recorded music too. If we think about it, there was music publishing and Broadway and vaudeville and all sorts of ways for musicians to exist. And I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is there's always been a desire for people to hear music, and so there will always be a need for, musicians in the world, and not only, classic masterpieces. Like, that's one thing that comes to mind is like, why listen to anything new when you could listen to John Coltrane and Stravinsky and Kate Bush and like A Tribe Called Quest and all sorts of people that have, distinguished themselves as giants. But I think there's always
the same
a desire.
thing as what you're talking about, why you're doing interviews at this time. It's like you get a community out of it.
Right. And so that's why, like, in popular music anyway, there's always going to be a desire for people to hear the world reflected back at them, hear the current world reflected back at them. So that's the answer to that question as to why listen to or create something new when there's already an abundance of greatness.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean,
well,
I
that's
think
certainly the most optimistic take that I've heard. So that's encouraging.
I'm also lucky because I write music for film and TV. That's how I make a living right now. And I feel like film and TV is sort of depression proof. If you look at the 30s, that's when, motion pictures were booming. Some would call it the golden age of cinema.
Sure. And now it's like the golden age of Netflix.
Right. Yeah.
It's like the best moment.
Yeah, and I think I've had something
Netflix.
like 4 Netflix shows released during quarantine, which is great.
Yeah, damn. Amazing.
So maybe that's why I'm a little bit more optimistic, but it's also based on what I've heard from other folks. I mean, I think some people are interested in exploring other ways of playing live. Why not bring back the residency model, where you go and play in a small club in a city for a week or a month and then move on to the next place? I mean, that was the prevalent model for a long time.
Especially in like musical traditions that are not the ones that I'm part of, at least.
Right, but maybe there's something to be learned from those traditions and applied to whatever you're doing,
Yeah, that's something that I've always really wanted to do and never executed that well. I don't know if it's just like the economics of it are harder to square, or it's harder to get venues for multiple nights in a row, like in the kind of venues that I'm playing. But yeah, that's not a terrifically normal thing. I mean, I guess if you're like a huge band, then you're doing that, but you don't see a ton of the like smaller venues doing multi-night stands.
It's an opportunity to think about that kind of thing. I don't know that there's anything constructive that can come out of focusing on the dread, even though it's hard not to.
Yeah.
But lots of musicians that I've talked to have been relieved that they didn't have to go on tour. Like they didn't feel like it, or they had been feeling a conflict with their values. Like on the one hand, loving playing in front of people, the love of getting to see the world, but on the other hand, an aversion to the pollution that it causes and that the ridiculous schedule of going to a different city every day and not really getting to enjoy the places where you're going. So I don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely relate with that. And I also am familiar with the sort of cliche of, musicians being so glad that they get off the road, and then after a couple weeks at home, they start to get the itch. And then they're like, when am I going to get out on the road again?
Yeah.
And that's real too. And I think everyone's probably going through some waves with this kind of thing. I know I was just talking to my brother yesterday, who's like been really steady through all this. And yesterday it definitely felt like he was like cracking a little bit, like the veneer was cracking, and like, okay, this is, it's about enough. It's ready to get back to work. But who knows? We could still be at the beginning of this. And I know that in terms of live music stuff, people are talking about at least next year for things to even out. So
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, there could be a vaccine developed sooner than later. Who knows?
Yeah.
The thing that I think is interesting is I feel like my life is always, I've become more and more comfortable with the instability of the life that I chose for myself. And so I think now everybody else is feeling that, and most people are, like you said, like you mentioned dentists. So we'll bring that up one more time. Like dentists don't get into dentistry so that they can go from project to project like a musician, right? They set up a practice and they create a very stable existence for themselves. So being forced out of that is probably more jarring to people like that, which is most people. But I feel like I'm always kind of going from one thing to the next, or having, at best having several things happening concurrently, with certain things coming to a halt unexpectedly or resuming. And that's just kind of how I've set up my life. So I feel like I'm more practiced in dealing with these kind of situations. But another thing to keep in mind is generally not knowing what your work situation is going to look like more than like 6 months out. Right. And it's funny because this year I've been booked the whole year out, and I think it'll slow down. But I had finally gotten to a point where I had enough work coming where I had my schedule roughly figured out for a whole year. And I was supposed to be going on tour this month. It got pushed back to October. We'll see if that is possible. But
that was your solo project.
But another thing to keep in mind is this is not an unprecedented situation. Everybody keeps saying like nothing like this has ever happened before. It happens like roughly every 100 years. There's a pandemic of some kind, and it hasn't stopped music from existing. It hasn't stopped people from performing music live, and it hasn't stopped innovation from happening in music and outside of music. So I don't really. Oh yeah, no, it could very well drive innovation. Yeah, usually, like I was saying before, traumatic events sometimes shake loose our creative voice as individuals, and maybe it will shake loose some developments. Sorry, just a second. Maybe it will shake loose some collective innovation as well. Yeah. Oh, I have no doubt. It'll grind some people up, but it'll also bring in some new growth for sure. Yeah, or it might do the same. It might grind some people up, and then they'll recover and be stronger than before. And then also, of course, it will just ruin some people's lives, and that's terrible.
No, everyone's going to be miraculously fine.
But the thing is, there's always forces that are ruining people's lives. I mean, you could argue that some of the same things that make the tour cycle go round and round ruin people's lives. You know, whether it's the pollution caused by it or the greed or whatever. It's not. We're in a unique situation, but it's not unprecedented. Yeah,
this is good. You might want to consider a therapy podcast. Like you're pretty level-headed here.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.